The afternoon sun fell over Silver Creek, staining the whole town in red, the color of an open wound. The wind carried the scent of dust and ash through the cracked wooden frame of a small house where Amira Boyd stood, her hands trembling as they clutched a thin sheet of paper her father had just signed. The ink was still wet, the handwriting uneven, yet it had already sealed her fate. Her father, Daniel Boyd, sat hunched over the table, the whiskey bottle more than half empty. His eyes were clouded, avoiding hers. "You really signed it?" Amira's voice broke, not from anger, but from despair. "You sold me to him?" Boyd didn't answer right away. He shook his head weakly, as if trying to deny what he'd done. "It's done, Amira. Blackwell's money clears the debt. We'll still have a roof over our heads." She laughed, a cracked, bitter sound. "A roof for you, not for me. You saved your skin by selling your daughter's soul." Her father's silence was heavy. His trembling hand lifted the glass, avoiding her gaze. "You don't understand. The man owns half this county. Cross him, and we lose everything." Amira's grip tightened on the paper, tears falling faster than she could wipe them. "I'd rather lose everything than marry a man who killed his wife." "People only say that." "No, father. They say it because it's true." Between them hung a silence thick as smoke. Then Amira looked down at the marriage contract, her name beside the bold signature of Gerald Blackwell. Something inside her cracked. She crushed the paper in her fist and turned for the door. "Amira," her father called, staggering to his feet, his voice hoarse. "Someday you'll understand." She looked back through tears. "No, father, not in this lifetime." She ran, out into the dust-choked street, the wind cutting her face, leaving behind a house collapsing like her trust. Shabby rooftops leaned against the wind, saloon signs creaked, and the church bell tolled like a sentence. She kept running until the sky bled red across the horizon. At the edge of town stood the old stable, the place she used to hide as a child. She pushed open the door, the scent of hay and horses wrapping around her like warmth. She sank to the ground, back against the wall, clutching the crushed paper, her sobs caught in her throat. "Miss Boyd?" The voice came from the shadows, low, steady. She startled, looking up. A man stepped forward from the dark corner, tall, broad-shouldered, his black hair falling to his collar. A forge hammer hung in his hand, and the lamplight flickered across his sun-worn face. It was Caleb Ward, the blacksmith who'd come to Silver Creek a few months back. Folks said he was quiet, a former soldier, but no one had ever seen him lose his temper. "I didn't mean to scare you," he said softly. "I thought the place was empty." Amira wiped her eyes quickly and lowered her head, just needed somewhere to hide. He set down the saddle he'd been mending and took a step closer, though not too close. "Hide from who?" She gave a short, bitter laugh. "Not from someone, from everything." His eyes flicked to her hand, where the wrinkled paper lay. "What's that?" She hesitated, then answered quietly. "A marriage contract. My father's forcing me to marry Gerald Blackwell. He wants me, and my father wants his money." Caleb's jaw tightened, his expression darkening. "And you don't want to marry him?" "Of course not. But no one asked me." He held out his hand, steady, open. "Let me see it." Amira hesitated, then placed the paper in his palm. His fingers brushed hers, warm, rough, certain. Caleb read every line, his brow sinking. Then, without a word, He tore the paper in half, then again and again, until it was nothing but scraps scattered on the dirt floor. Amira froze, stunned. You shouldn't have done that." Caleb looked up, his voice calm but firm. "No man has the right to own you. Not Blackwell, not anyone." She stood still. In the dim light, his eyes held something steady. Not anger, not pity, just quiet conviction, as unshakable as the ground itself. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. The wind rattled the stable door. Amira looked at the man standing before her, the one who had just torn apart the chains she hadn't dared to break. And somewhere inside her fear, something flickered to life. Hope. A single raindrop fell, soaking into the shredded paper on the dirt floor. And with it, fate began to change its course. Thunder rolled long across the thick, dark sky. The rain hadn't come yet, but the wind had already torn the stable doors wide open. Amira Boyd sat curled against the wooden wall, her breath unsteady, still unable to believe what had just happened. The marriage contract, ripped apart, her fate undone by a man who was nearly a stranger. Caleb Ward stood silent amid the dirt floor strewn with damp scraps of paper. The lamplight flickered across his shoulder. Sweat and dust clung to him. He said nothing, only watched the storm gather outside. Something in his instincts, the kind honed by danger, told him to stay alert. "Do you hear something?" Amira whispered. He tilted his head, listening. Then his eyes sharpened. Horses. Before she could ask, the sound came, hooves pounding hard and fast, like a heartbeat filled with rage. A lantern's glow cut through the night and stopped at the door. The hinges screamed. Then came a man's voice, cold, drawn out, and metallic. "So this is where my little bride's been hiding." Gerald Blackwell. He stepped in with two men behind him, their boots gleaming, crushing the wet dirt underfoot. The light revealed a pale face, his mouth curved into a smile that was half mockery, half hunger. Amira instinctively backed away, seeking cover. Caleb moved forward, blocking her completely. "Get out, Blackwell." His voice was low but firm as forged iron. Blackwell smirked. "I don't talk to blacksmiths. I've come for my wife." "She's not your wife. She's mine. I've got the papers to prove it." Caleb's voice stayed calm. "Those papers are dust now." Blackwell's smile faltered. His gaze dropped to the floor, where bits of torn, rain-soaked paper still clung to the dirt. "Ah," he said slowly. "So it was you." He turned to his men. "Take him." They drew their guns almost in unison, but Caleb moved first. He dropped low, snatched a long iron spike from a tool crate, and hurled it straight at the lamp. The light shattered. The flame hissed out, smoke rising. Darkness swallowed the stable whole. Chaos broke loose. Amira heard the crash of wood, a grunt of pain, the shattering of glass. She held her breath, her pulse hammering. Shapes moved in flashes of lightning from outside. "Run!" Caleb's voice cut through the noise, hard, commanding. Amira hesitated for half a second, then bolted for the back door. The wind slapped her face, the first drops of rain cutting like ice. Behind her, gunshots cracked. Once, twice. She stumbled, her heart stopping in her chest. "Caleb!" She turned just as lightning lit up the yard. A figure burst out of the stable and swung onto a black horse. "Get on!" he shouted. She ran, her skirts tangling around her legs, mud splashing up her calves. Caleb pulled the reins. The horse reared and screamed into the wind. He reached out, hand extended. His fingers locked around her wrist, warm, rough, unyielding, and with one strong pull, she was airborne, landing behind him. "Hold on!" She wrapped her arms around him instinctively, feeling the heat of his back through the soaked fabric. The horse surged forward, hooves striking the waterlogged ground, each strike a thunderclap in her chest. Behind them the shots came again, then faded into the storm. The rain poured harder now, mingling with the scent of gunpowder and earth. Amira pressed her head against his shoulder, gasping. She couldn't tell if it was fear or relief flooding her veins. Caleb leaned low, holding the reins tight, his voice cutting through the wind. "We're not going back." The storm howled around them, carrying away the shouting voices, leaving only the rhythm of hooves and thunder. The song of escape. Amira closed her eyes and clung tighter. She didn't know where this road would lead, only that behind her was hell, and before her, on the back of this galloping horse, was the man who had risked everything to say one truth: no man owns you. The storm broke full over Silver Creek, sweeping away the light, sweeping away the past. And in the heart of the tempest, two runaways began to rewrite their story, born from the ashes of a paper that no longer existed. The wind howled across the hills like a cry from the dark. Rain whipped their faces, cold and heavy as stone. Caleb's black horse tore through the curtain of storm, its hooves striking the soaked earth with a sound that echoed into the night. Behind them came the pursuit, hooves pounding, gunshots cracking, fury chasing through the open plain. Amira clung to him, arms wrapped around his waist, her breath tangled with his racing heartbeat. Every jolt of the saddle jarred her body, but his hand came back to steady hers, firm and certain. "Hold tight," he said, his voice calm, impossibly calm, while death thundered behind them. Lightning split the sky wide open. For an instant she saw the mud splattered across her skirts, and the dark patch spreading across his shoulder. Blood. The rain couldn't wash it away. "You're hurt," she cried, her voice barely a whisper against the wind. "It's nothing," he said, lowering himself over the reins, steering the horse hard to the left. "Just grazed me." But the air smelled of blood. They raced across an open field, the grass flattened by the storm. Far ahead, a ravine opened like a wound in the earth, deep, black, and waiting. Caleb pulled the reins tight and drove the horse toward it. The sound of pursuit began to fade. When they reached the shadow of the cliffs, the wind died. Only the sound of their breathing and the soft drip of rain from the rock walls remained. "We're safe for now," Caleb said, his voice hoarse. He slid off the horse, landing heavy on one knee, a hand pressed to his shoulder. Amira dismounted after him, her drenched dress clinging to her skin, the chill sinking deep into her bones. She stepped toward him, her hands shaking but determined. "Let me see." "You don't have to." "Let me." Her tone was quiet, but strong. He didn't argue. She peeled the wet fabric from his shoulder, revealing a long gash, blood still seeping through. She inhaled sharply, then tore a strip from her skirt, dipped it in the rainwater pooled at her feet, and pressed it against the wound. He flinched, but didn't move away. In the pale light of the lightning that flickered outside, her face seemed almost translucent, her curls plastered to her cheeks, her eyes glowing dark with worry. Her hands trembled, yet she moved carefully, gently cleaning the blood away. Caleb looked down at her, his gaze softening. "Aren't you afraid?" Her voice came low. "I am. but fear doesn't matter as much as gratitude." He frowned slightly. "Grateful for what?" "For you. For tearing that paper. For doing what I couldn't." He said nothing. Only the rain spoke, dripping from the stone walls like a heartbeat in the quiet. When the wound was wrapped, she sat beside him. Neither spoke. They simply watched the endless dark ahead, the storm still muttering somewhere far away. The cold seeped through their clothes, yet in that stillness there was a strange warmth, the warmth of survival, of something fragile but real taking root between them. After a while, Amira asked softly, "Do you regret it? Ripping up the marriage paper?" Caleb turned his head. His eyes carried the calm of someone who had seen death and learned not to flinch. "I only regret not tearing it sooner." A flash of lightning illuminated their faces. Two strangers, sitting side by side between walls of stone, between a world that had collapsed behind them and another still waiting to be born. She glanced at his hand, resting on the damp ground, rough, scarred, streaked with mud and blood. Without knowing why, she laid her hand over his. He didn't pull away. The rain softened, thinning into scattered drops. The world held its breath. "He won't stop," Amira whispered. Caleb's reply came low and steady. "He can chase us, but he'll never own you." He turned to her, eyes unwavering. "He can't have you, Amira. You're free." She met his gaze, and for a moment, the rest of the world faded. In that gaze, she saw not escape, but choice. And for the first time in her life, she knew she wouldn't run again. Because for the first time, she wasn't being led. She was living. The rain had long stopped, but the air still clung with dampness. Deep inside the ravine, they found a hollow in the rock, just wide enough to shield them from the wind. Caleb built a fire from the scraps of dry wood he'd gathered. The small flame flickered, casting his face in light and shadow, drawn, exhausted, yet his eyes burned steady, like iron fresh from the forge. Amira sat nearby, knees pulled close, her skirt still damp and streaked with mud. She watched him unwrap the makeshift bandage on his shoulder. The wound had darkened, but blood still seeped through in small, stubborn beads. Each movement made the muscles along his arm tighten. "Let me help," she said softly. He started to refuse, but the look in her eyes silenced him. He nodded once. Amira tore another strip from the hem of her dress, dipped it in water, and knelt in front of him. Her breath mingled with the smoke, close enough for him to feel her heart's quick rhythm, though her hand fought to stay steady. "You don't have to do this," he murmured. "You saved me," she said. "This is the least I can do." The cold cloth touched his wound, and he hissed between his teeth. Amira's head shot up, concern flashing in her eyes. "I'm sorry." "It's all right," he said quietly. "Just stings a little." She continued, her hands trembling, though each movement grew surer. The firelight played over her towel, warm brown skin, dark eyes glinting in the glow, wet curls clinging to her cheeks. Caleb watched her, and something rose inside him, a feeling both tender and painful, a kind of peace he hadn't known in years. When the bandage was tied, she sat beside him again. Their breaths mingled with the scent of smoke. For a long while, neither spoke, only listened to the crackle of wood. "You were a soldier," she said at last. her tone careful, afraid to disturb the quiet. He nodded. Years ago, my brother went too. 4 years younger, kinder, believed in justice more than I ever did. Her voice was soft. He didn't come back? Caleb shook his head, his gaze fixed on the flames. He didn't. I did. But part of me stayed out there. The firelight glowed along the scars that crossed his arm, pale, faded lines from battles long buried. What about you? He asked. Amira hesitated. My mother died when I was little. My father raised me alone. After she passed, something in him broke. He turned to drink, to debt, to despair. She smiled faintly, sadness curling at the edges. I don't blame him. I just wish he'd asked me once if I was happy. Caleb studied her. He was weak. You're not. You don't know that. I do, he said simply. You didn't run from yourself. Only strong people can do that. The words made her look up. His gaze held no pity, only truth, solid and unshaken. The fire burned low, leaving only soft amber embers. Amira reached forward to add another log. Caleb leaned in to help. Their hands met on the damp wood, and for a heartbeat, neither moved. Warmth spread from the touch, quiet and certain. She didn't draw away, and he didn't let go. No more words were needed. Outside, a faint breeze brushed through the ravine, stirring the flame so it painted shifting light over their faces. In that silence, the space between them disappeared. Caleb straightened, his voice low but steady, carrying the weight of a vow. You can rest tonight. I'll keep watch. Amira shook her head gently. We'll keep watch together. I don't want to sleep until I know there's a tomorrow. He smiled, a tired, honest smile. You're braver than I thought, Amira Boyd. And you're gentler than you seem, Caleb Ward. Outside, the mist settled. Crickets sang faintly in the distance. The fire burned down to a soft glow, throwing two shadows against the stone. Not rescuer and rescued, but two souls clinging to warmth in a cold, indifferent world. When she rested her head against his shoulder, Caleb didn't move. He only stared into the small flame between them and whispered to himself, She doesn't belong to anyone. She's free now. By noon the next day, the storm had passed. The air was clear again, the earth still damp, carrying the raw scent of wild grass after rain. They left the ravine, following a narrow dirt path winding down toward a shallow valley. The murmur of water grew louder until Amira saw a small stream appear between moss-covered rocks, clear and alive, curling through the green. Across the bank stood an old wooden cabin, its roof sagging, the walls split in places, yet traces of old smoke and life still seemed to linger in the air. Caleb dismounted, scanning the place. We can stay here for a while. Amira nodded. She helped him lead the horse inside, removed the saddle, and spread it across the floor as a seat. While Caleb checked the walls for stability, she gathered dry sticks and built a small fire by the door. Smoke curled up thin and pale, mingling with the mist from the stream, bringing a rare peace to the long days of running. From the cloth pouch at the horse's side, Amira pulled the last scraps of dried meat. She tore them into pieces, dropped them into a tin pot, and added stream water. When the pot began to simmer, the simple scent of meat and smoke made both their stomachs growl. Caleb sat just outside the cabin, repairing the torn saddle. His rough hands guided the heavy needle through leather, each stitch strong and sure. The sunlight flickered across the muscles in his arm, glinting over old scars that no longer hurt, but never truly faded. Amira watched through the shimmer of smoke. "You do everything so carefully," she said softly. He looked up, the corner of his mouth lifting. "Careful's the only way I know to stay alive." She smiled faintly. "I survived by luck." His gaze lingered on her, steady, thoughtful. "I don't think that's luck, Amira. I think that's strength." The words silenced her. Through the thin veil of smoke, his eyes held hers, not with pity, but with understanding, something deeper and wordless. When the meal was ready, they sat beside each other, sharing the steaming pot between them. For the first time since leaving Silver Creek, both laughed without caution. "I haven't seen you smile like that," Amira said, tilting her head. Caleb's eyes followed the stream. "I forgot I still could." "What will you do, after all this?" she asked, hesitant. "When there's no one left chasing us." He thought for a moment. "Maybe open a blacksmith shop, a small one. Somewhere no one calls me a stranger." He turned to her. "And you?" Amira looked into the fire. "I'd like a garden. Not big. Just enough to smell flowers every morning. My mother loved wild blooms. I think if they grew around my home, she'd find her way back." Caleb nodded slowly. "That's beautiful." The sun dropped lower. Golden light spilled through the cracked boards, warm and soft as memory. Amira sat by the fire, combing her curls with a wooden brush. Slow and steady strokes. Caleb watched quietly from the doorway, running a cloth over his knife. The light caught her skin, smooth, brown, luminous in the flicker of flame, and something in him shifted, deep and quiet, like the ache of remembering what peace felt like. She looked up and met his gaze. For a brief moment, neither looked away. Not from embarrassment, but from recognition. The silent kind that meant they finally saw each other, truly. She set the brush aside, her voice barely above the whisper of the fire. "How far will you go to escape Blackwell?" Caleb kept his eyes on the flames. "Far enough that he never dares step out of the shadows again." "And me?" "You'll go wherever you choose. No one gets to decide for you anymore." Amira smiled, though the sadness in it was thin and quiet. "The place I want to go, I'm not sure it exists." Caleb looked at her, his tone deep and certain, the sound of metal meeting the anvil. "Then maybe it's something you make, not something you find. Some things are worth fighting for." The firelight flickered over his face, part glow, part scar, just like the two lives trying to heal beside it. Outside, the stream kept singing its low, endless song, carrying the sound of water into the falling dusk. Amira didn't speak. She simply watched him, feeling a calm she couldn't name. For the first time since the night she ran, she wasn't afraid of what waited beyond the dark. That night, the rain returned. Not the furious kind that tore across the plains, but a slow, heavy rain, falling steady against the worn wooden roof. The sound mingled with the stream outside, soft and rhythmic, like the breath of the earth itself. The chill seeped through the cracks in the cabin, clinging to their skin, while the small fire in the hearth flickered as if fighting to stay alive. Amira sat by the door, arms wrapped around her knees, watching the silver curtain of rain. Caleb was in the opposite corner, his shirt still damp from leading the horse to shelter. He sat with his head bowed, untying the reins, his broad shoulders throwing long shadows on the wall where the firelight danced and dimmed. A drop of water fell from the leaky roof, hitting the floorboards with a small sound. Then another. Soon a faint rhythm formed, drop after drop, gathering into a shallow pool. Amira rose, searching for a piece of old cloth to cover the leak, but a gust of wind caught it and tore it from her hands. Caleb stepped forward, catching the edge of the fabric. "Let me." His hand brushed hers. Just a fleeting touch, but enough to send a tremor through her. He stood close, his breath warm, carrying the scent of smoke and rain. When he lifted the cloth to patch the leak, the roof groaned, forcing them to step back, deeper into the corner, close enough that there was no space left between them. They sat still. Neither spoke. Only the rain filled the silence, the sound of their hearts and their breathing blending with it. The firelight fell over Amira's face, her curls wet and clinging to her neck, droplets tracing down her brown skin, gleaming gold under the faint glow. When she turned, Caleb was looking at her, not like a man claiming, but like someone fighting between what he should do and what he wanted. "Does your shoulder still hurt?" she asked quietly. He nodded once, trying to hide the fatigue. The wound had darkened, a trace of dried blood showing through the worn fabric. Amira moved closer, saying nothing. She lifted her hand, and when he didn't stop her, her fingers brushed the edge of the wound. "You don't have to. Don't lie," she said softly, and he fell silent. Her fingertips traced the scar, wiping away the last of the blood. His skin burned under her touch. Caleb closed his eyes, drawing a long breath before letting it go. The world outside fell away. The storm, the chase, the fear, all drowned beneath the quiet pulse between them. When she looked up, their faces were only a breath apart. His eyes, gray-blue like the sky before a storm, searched hers, not asking for permission, but for truth. She answered without words. She leaned in. The first kiss was light as smoke, brief yet endless. Their breaths mingled, the scent of rain, of skin, of fire, weaving into a language that belonged to no one but them. Caleb cupped her face, his rough hands astonishingly gentle. Amira pressed her palm against his chest, feeling his heartbeat pound beneath her fingers. No words, no fear, only the quiet certainty of being found. They met in the rhythm of the falling rain. Every touch, every sigh, every heartbeat was a vow that they no longer belonged to fear nor to fate, but to this moment where nothing could claim them but choice. The fire sank low, the coals glowing faintly red. The world outside melted into the storm's whisper, and within the cabin, something tender and bright began to bloom, like the first light after a long night. Caleb brushed a strand of hair from her face, his voice barely rising above the rain. "I'm not here because I'm afraid," he murmured. "I'm here because of you." Amira smiled, her eyes closing as she whispered back, "Then I'm not afraid anymore." That night, they belonged to each other, not because they were running, but because they had found freedom in each other's arms. When dawn came, the first light pierced through the roof's cracks, glinting over two hands clasped tightly together. No words were needed. Both knew from that moment on they were no longer fugitives, but two souls moving toward the same horizon. Dawn stretched across the valley, pale and golden, like a wound finally closing. The light slipped through the cracks in the cabin wall, touching two still bodies beside the dying fire. Amira stirred first, feeling the warmth still around her, and Caleb's steady breath, deep and calm. For a moment, the world felt motionless, as if time itself had chosen to rest. But peace in the west never lasted long. Caleb had risen earlier. When he returned from washing at the stream, his hair was damp, glinting under the morning sun. He stood quietly for a while, as though weighing something heavy inside him. His face was calm, but his eyes carried the burden of a truth he could no longer hold. "Amira," he said at last, voice low and rough. "There's something I need to tell you." She looked up, sensing the shift in his tone. "About what?" He sat beside her, clasped his hands, then let them fall open again. "I'm not just a blacksmith." The air stilled. Outside, the stream's murmur filled the silence. "I was a soldier, like I told you," he went on. "But after the war, I became a bounty hunter." Amira froze, not out of fear, but surprise. "I thought you'd left that life behind." A faint smile touched his lips, weary, sad. "I thought so too. But there's someone I never could leave behind." "Who?" "My brother, James." Caleb's gaze drifted toward the trees swaying in the early breeze. 3 years ago, he was killed, tricked during a bank job gone bad. The man behind it was Nathan Cortland. I've hunted him across half the frontier. The trail led me to Silver Creek. Amira's breath caught. "Silver Creek." "Yes," he said quietly. "Your home. The place where he hides behind a banker's name and polished manners." The puzzle pieces slid into place. Why Caleb had come to that quiet town, why his eyes always held distance, and why he'd faced Blackwell without hesitation. "You came to Silver Creek to find him," she whispered. "At first, yes," he said. "But then, I found you." She looked at him, torn between understanding and dread. "If Cortland's that powerful, what do you plan to do? Kill him?" Caleb didn't answer right away. He stared down at his hands that had once drawn a gun, spilled blood, and yet had also held her face as gently as if it were the last pure thing in the world. "I don't know. I just know I can't stop until I find him. But I won't drag you into that fight." Amira shook her head slowly. "You already did, Caleb. The moment you tore that paper, my path was tied to yours. There's no going back now." Their eyes met. No need for more words. Something bound them now, invisible but unbreakable. "Where will we go?" she asked. "Across the border," he said. "Nevada territory. There's a man I trust, Samuel Cooper, a marshal. If we reach him, we'll be safe." Amira nodded, resolve shining through her exhaustion. "Then we go. I've spent too long running from fear. I'd rather ride toward it. With you." Caleb looked at her, something like pride flickering behind the weight in his gaze. He reached out, brushed a loose curl from her temple. "If you come with me, it won't be easy. Cortland has money. Blackwell has men. We only have each other." She smiled faintly. "That's enough." Outside, the wind began to pick up, carrying dust from the hills. Amira packed their things while Caleb fastened the saddle straps, his movements steady, deliberate. The horse snorted softly, sensing what lay ahead. As they mounted, a sound echoed faintly through the valley. Amira turned. Down the dirt trail behind them, a plume of dust rose, gray, rolling like smoke. Caleb squinted toward the horizon. Not traitors. Then who? Blackwell, he said grimly. He's not done. The distant thunder of hooves grew clearer, heavy, fast, relentless. The wind carried the metallic clatter of guns and the raw sound of pursuit. Caleb leaned close, voice low but firm. There's no turning back now, Amira. From here on, we ride till the end. Her arms tightened around his waist, her chest pressed to his back, and for the first time, she no longer felt like they were running. They were charging toward whatever fate dared to meet them. The horse lunged forward, kicking up a storm of dust. Behind them, the cabin vanished in the haze, swallowed by distance and wind. Far off, Blackwell and his riders followed, their silhouettes bleeding into the red horizon, where the past and the future were bound to collide. The noon sun blazed mercilessly over the barren hills. Caleb's horse thundered through the red dust, its breath sharp and ragged, mane whipping in the wind. Behind them, the pounding of hooves grew louder, joined by gunfire that cracked against the canyon walls and rolled back like thunder. "Down!" Caleb shouted. Amira pressed herself flat against his back, her arms gripping his waist. A bullet screamed past, shattering a rock ahead. Shards flew, stinging her cheek. They swerved sharply into a narrow ravine, the walls towering on both sides like the throat of the earth itself. Wind howled through the gap. Smoke and dust mingled, thick and choking. Caleb crouched low, guiding the reins with both hands, every turn a fight for survival. Behind them, Blackwell's men charged hard, their shouts echoing through the stone corridor. "We're trapped!" Amira cried as the path split. One side a sheer wall, the other dropping into a yawning gorge. Caleb pulled hard on the reins, spinning the horse sideways just as another bullet tore past their heads. He drew his gun and fired. One of the riders went down, tumbling from his saddle and crashing against the rocks before vanishing into the abyss. But Blackwell kept coming, face red, eyes wild, the madness of pride and vengeance burning bright. Another shot rang out. Caleb jerked, the bullet tearing through his shoulder. Blood bloomed across his shirt, dark and sudden. He stayed upright, but his breath hitched. Amira's cry broke through the roar of the chase. She wrapped her arm around him, holding tight as he swayed. Ahead, the trail narrowed, only wide enough for one. "Hold on," he rasped, voice rough. He spurred the horse forward. They plunged through the tight passage as rocks cascaded from above, filling the air with grit and noise. They had barely cleared the last bend when another gunman appeared, charging from behind a boulder, knife flashing in the sun. Caleb turned too late, but Amira, driven by instinct, seized a rock from the ground and hurled it with all her strength. The rock struck the man's wrist. The knife fell. He doubled over in pain. Caleb fired twice. The sound thundered through the canyon, then silence. Amira stood frozen, her hand trembling. Caleb turned, pulled her close, pressing her against him, just as another stray shot cracked from far behind. His back hit the canyon wall, his arms shielding her. Their breath came fast, mingling in the heat and smoke. Their hearts beat in unison. Whether from fear or something deeper, neither could tell. "You're bleeding," she whispered, her fingers brushing the wound. "I'll live," he murmured, his voice faint but steady. "As long as you're safe." "Don't say it like I'm the one who needs saving," she said, eyes glistening. "I can fight too, Caleb." He met her gaze, the ghost of a smile on his lips. "You already did. You just saved me." In the distance, the sound of hooves began to fade, but Amira knew Blackwell wasn't finished. Caleb, pale now, slumped forward slightly, blood seeping through his bandage. She helped him off the horse, guiding him toward a crack in the rocks, a small hollow carved by wind and time. Inside, the air was damp and cool. She lowered him gently to the ground, rummaged through the saddlebag for bandages, a needle, and water. "You don't have to. Be quiet." Her voice shook, but her hands were firm. Light slipped through a slit in the rock, glinting on her sweat-streaked face. She washed the wound with the cold water, then threaded the needle. Her fingers trembled, but she didn't stop. When the needle pierced his skin, Caleb's hand shot out, gripping hers hard. He bit down on a breath, refusing to cry out. Amira's eyes filled, and a tear slid down, landing on his chest, lost among the blood. "I won't let you die," she whispered. "Not while I'm here." He opened his eyes, the pain softening into something gentler. "You're crying." "No," she said, her voice catching. "It's just the sweat." He smiled, faint but real. Outside, the wind swept through the canyon, carrying the faint scent of gunpowder and dust. Inside that narrow refuge, time seemed to hold still. When she finished stitching the wound, Amira pressed her palm against his chest, feeling the stubborn beat of his heart. She rested her forehead against his shoulder, her body trembling. "We'll survive, Caleb," she murmured, half a prayer, half a promise. "I swear it." He nodded weakly, eyes closed, his large hand finding hers. In the howl of the canyon wind, their fingers tightened together, blood and tears mingling into one unspoken vow. The afternoon sun slanted across the canyon walls, painting them with streaks of gold and shadow, like old scars that refused to fade. Inside the rocky hollow, Amira sat with her head resting on Caleb's shoulder, her fingers laced tightly around his hand, the blood on it now dry and dark as rust. Outside, the wind hissed through the canyon, carrying with it the distant sound of horses. At first, she thought it was Blackwell returning. Her heart clenched. She pressed her hand gently over Caleb's lips, urging silence. But the rhythm of the hooves was different, steady, purposeful, not the chaotic charge of hired guns. Then came a shout that echoed off the stone walls. "U.S. Marshal! Lay down your weapons!" Caleb's eyes opened. Through the haze of pain, recognition flickered. His cracked lips curved faintly. "Samuel Cooper," he rasped. Amira looked up. At the mouth of the canyon, men in long dust coats rode forward, silver badges catching the dying light. At their head was a broad-shouldered man with weathered skin and sharp eyes. He reined in his horse as soon as he saw Caleb. "Good Lord, Caleb Young," the man said, his voice rough but warm with relief. "You just had to make me cross half the territory to drag you out of another mess, didn't you?" Caleb let out a breath, half laugh, half groan. "You've still got good timing, Sam." Before Amira could make sense of it, another wave of riders thundered from the opposite direction. Dust rose like a storm. Blackwell and his men burst into the canyon, guns drawn. But the sight of the marshals stopped them cold. Samuel Cooper turned his horse, his voice ringing out like a commandment. "Gerald Blackwell, you're under arrest for attempted murder and kidnapping. Drop your weapon," Blackwell sneered. "You think you can arrest me? Do you even know who I am?" Samuel's voice went flat as iron. "A wanted murderer from Colorado territory. And right now, you're standing on my ground." Blackwell's grin twisted. He raised his gun, but the report came before his finger touched the trigger. A deputy's bullet struck the weapon's grip, sending it spinning from his hand. His men froze, the sudden silence thick as dust. Then, one by one, they dropped their guns. Amira ran out from the hollow. "Stop! Please! He's hurt!" Samuel signaled his men. Two marshals dismounted and hurried to Caleb's side, lifting him carefully. Amira followed, refusing to let go of his hand. She could feel his pulse, faint but still there, fluttering like a trapped bird. "Get him to camp," Samuel ordered. They laid Caleb on a thick tarp. Blood had begun to seep through his bandage again. Samuel knelt beside him, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. "Stay with me, soldier," he said softly. "Don't you dare check out on me now." Caleb's eyes fluttered open. He looked past Samuel, toward Amira. His lips moved, barely forming words. "Cortland." Samuel understood instantly. "He's in Silver Creek," he said. "We've got a warrant ready." "You did it, Caleb. You led us right to him." But Amira barely heard. Her focus was only on the man fading in her arms. She clutched his hand tighter, tears spilling freely now. "Don't talk," she whispered. "Just breathe." Caleb's smile was faint but real. "Amira, you're free now. Don't let anyone take that from you again." She shook her head, voice breaking. "Freedom isn't running away, Caleb. It's choosing where to stay." He smiled again. That same tired, gentle smile she remembered from the night by the fire. Some things are worth fighting for. Then his eyes closed. His breathing slowed. "No, Caleb!" She caught his head, cradling it in her lap, her tears falling on his face. Samuel rested a firm, steady hand on her shoulder. "He'll live," he said. "We've got a doctor at camp. He just needs time." Amira looked up, her face streaked with dust and tears. For the first time, she saw belief in Samuel's eyes and clung to it. The marshals lifted Caleb carefully onto a horse. Samuel turned to his men. "Tie up every last one of Blackwell's gang. Send a telegram to Silver Creek. Tell them to lock down Cortland. This time, he doesn't run." As the group began their slow march out of the canyon, Amira rode beside Caleb's horse. She held his hand the whole way, silent, steady. The wind tugged at her hair, carrying the faint rattle of the marshal's flag snapping against the evening sky. For the first time, amid all the blood and dust, she felt something stronger than fear. Justice and hope. By the time they reached the open plain, the sun was setting, painting the sky in crimson and gold, the color of blood, of fire, and of rebirth. The first morning at Marshal Samuel Cooper's ranch was strangely still. Sunlight slipped through the cracks of the wooden shutters, laying pale golden lines across the floor where Caleb lay unmoving. His skin was drained of color, his shoulder and side wrapped tightly in clean bandages. The sharp scent of antiseptic mingled with the faint warmth of the kitchen fire drifting through the air. Amira sat beside the bed, her hand folded around his. She hadn't slept since the night before. Every time he stirred, she startled awake. Outside, Samuel's voice carried through the doorway as he spoke to the doctor, calm and sure. "He's strong. All he needs now is time." Amira didn't answer. She only smoothed the blanket and began reading aloud from a worn book she had found on the shelf. Her voice was low, steady, like a lullaby. "The brave are not those who never fear, but those who walk through fear and keep their hearts open." Caleb didn't reply, but his breathing grew more even. The days that followed moved slowly, like dew forming on the eaves at dawn. Amira rose before sunrise, brewed coffee, heated water, changed his bandages. When the day grew hot, she pressed cool cloths to his forehead. When night fell, she read to him again, her voice as soft as the stream murmuring beyond the window. Each time her fingers brushed his skin, her heart beat faster, no longer from fear, but from something deep and tender. Even in his silence, Caleb seemed to feel her presence. Sometimes, his lips moved faintly, shaping her name. On the fifth day, his eyes opened. Pale gray light poured in as he blinked slowly, struggling to focus. Amira was reading again, and the moment she saw his hand twitch, the book slipped from her fingers. Caleb. He turned his head slightly, lips cracked, voice raw. Water. She hurried to pour him some, guiding the cup to his lips. His hand was cold, her own shaking, as she held it steady. He drank, then glanced around the small wooden room. Where are we? Samuel's ranch, she said softly. He found us. Caleb exhaled, a sound between relief and disbelief. Blackwell? Captured. He'll hang in Colorado. And Cortland. Her voice faltered. He's in Silver Creek now. The marshal found enough evidence to bury him for 10 lifetimes. Caleb lay back, eyes darkening with thought. So it's over. Amira sat at the edge of the bed, her gaze gentle but certain. No, Caleb. Every ending is just a beginning in disguise. He smiled faintly, weary but real. You always say things that make me stop and think. That afternoon, Samuel appeared in the doorway holding a sealed envelope. From Silver Creek, addressed to you. Amira opened it, and the handwriting made her hands tremble. It was her father's. My daughter, I did the unforgivable. I thought I was saving you, but in truth, I sold you out of fear. If there's another life after this, I only hope to hear you call me father once more, without the look of a stranger in your eyes. Tears fell, darkening the paper. Amira folded the letter carefully and placed it by the window, watching the golden wheat ripple beyond the glass. Protection without respect isn't love, she whispered. He never understood that. That evening, the air turned cool and quiet. Caleb, awake now though still weak, insisted on sitting up. Amira entered with a bowl of soup. You need to eat, she said gently. The doctor said, Come here, he interrupted, voice soft but firm. She hesitated, then stepped closer. He reached out his bandaged hand. When she placed hers into it, he held it firmly, his eyes steady and kind. You've watched over me for nights on end. You needed care. And you, he said slowly, need to live. He paused, his tone dropping to something almost like a vow. Amira, I've spent my life fighting for things that never mattered. But if it were for you, I'd fight every battle again. Her eyes shimmered in the firelight. You already fought, Caleb. Not with a gun, but by letting me be free. His grip tightened slightly. And you taught me that freedom isn't about leaving. It's about knowing when to stay. Outside, the wind carried the scent of freshly cut grass. The room glowed with the amber hue of sunset, the light spilling gently over their joined hands, as if the day itself refused to let go of them. From the doorway, Samuel watched in silence, then smiled. Some battles don't need bullets, he murmured, and quietly closed the door. Amira leaned her head on Caleb's shoulder, listening to the rhythm of his heartbeat, steady now, stronger with each passing moment. Beyond the window, The sun sank slowly behind the hills, its light stretching across the fields like a river of gold. She whispered, her voice sure and warm, "We survived, Caleb, and this time it's to truly begin." Autumn swept across the western plains in shades of gold and the sweet scent of post-harvest wind. Around the Cooper Ranch, the fields shimmered with renewed life, and from the small wooden house at the end of the valley came the rhythmic sound of hammer striking iron. Caleb had recovered. He stood outside, sleeves rolled to his elbows, his white shirt marked with sweat and soot. His shoulder was still wrapped, but his arm had regained its strength. Each swing of the hammer rang like the heartbeat of a man reborn. When he looked up, the evening sun burned low behind him, gilding his weathered face. The face of a man who had walked through fire and finally found peace in smoke and wind. Samuel Cooper stepped out onto the porch, a folded paper in hand. "I've got something for you, Caleb Young." Caleb set the hammer down and took the letter. In clean, firm handwriting, it read, "Deputy Marshal of Willow Springs." He looked up, a small smile tugging at his mouth. "You're dragging me into trouble again, Sam." Samuel chuckled. "No. I'm giving you a chance to chase the one thing you've always believed in. Justice." From the porch, Amira watched them. The sight of him standing tall beneath the wide sky filled her chest with warmth. The man who had once shielded her in the midst of gunfire now stood firm in the sunlight, no longer running, but building something lasting. A few weeks later, they moved to Willow Springs, a quiet town smaller than Silver Creek, lined with whispering birch trees and the hum of calm days. Their home sat on a hillside overlooking a stretch of fields that reached the horizon. The house was modest, every plank nailed by Caleb's own hands. Along the porch, Amira planted rows of sunflowers, bright and golden against the fading autumn light. That afternoon, the air was clear, the wind carrying the scent of grass and fresh bread from the kitchen. Amira carried a basin of water into the yard, washing her hands. When she looked up, she saw Caleb walking toward her, coat slung over his shoulder, a faint smile on his lips. "You've worked all day," she teased. "I brought you some water." "And I," he replied, "brought you something else." She tilted her head, puzzled. Caleb stopped a few steps away and held out a small wooden box, its brass edges dulled by time. "This belonged to my mother," he said, opening it. Inside lay a silver ring, simple but luminous in the fading light. "She wore it through the war. She used to say, 'Love never dies. It just changes shape.'" Amira looked from the ring to him. The breeze caught a few strands of her hair, brushing them across her cheek. Caleb knelt. The world seemed to stop. Even the birds fell silent. The only sound left was the wind rustling through dry grass. "It's not because I saved you," he said, voice rough but steady. "It's because you stayed when you didn't have to. Not because I saved you. Because you chose me." Amira pressed her hand to her lips, tears blurring her vision. Everything she had lost, her mother, her home, her faith, seemed to gather into this single, fragile moment. She stepped closer, the honey-colored light washing over them both. "Caleb Ward," she whispered, "I choose you, today and every day after." He took her hand and slipped the ring onto her finger. The silver caught the light, gleaming like a promise reborn. She smiled through her tears and leaned forward, kissing him. A slow, quiet kiss, as gentle as the first breath after a storm. When they rose, the wind swept through the fields, carrying the faint chime of a distant church bell. The last rays of the sun touched their joined hands, glinting on the silver ring between them. "See?" Amira said softly, her voice trembling but strong. "Freedom isn't about going anywhere. It's about being where your heart wants to be." Caleb tightened his hold on her hand, his eyes glowing like steel in the firelight. "And my heart," he said, "will always stop here." Beyond them, the sun sank slowly behind the hills. Their shadows stretched long across the golden prairie, no longer the shadows of two souls bound by fate, but of two people who had found each other in freedom, in love, and in the peace they built with their own hands. Years passed, and the winds over Willow Springs changed. The prairie, once dry and stubborn, now rolled green across the distant hills. At its heart stood a ranch called Freedom's Claim. Pale wooden house, white fences, a small flag fluttering in the wind. It was the home Amira and Caleb had built with sweat, faith, and the kind of love born in fire and blood. At dawn, children's laughter echoed through the valley. Two figures raced across the fields of yellow blooms, a curly-haired girl clutching a bouquet of wild daisies, and her older brother chasing after the shepherd dog. From the porch, Amira watched them, a slow, gentle smile softening her face. "Do you remember the day we first came here?" Caleb asked behind her. His beard was streaked with gray now, his hair touched with silver, though his eyes still held the same light they had the day she met him in the old stable. Amira nodded, her gaze sweeping the endless grass. "It was all rock and dust back then. Just a leaky shack and your stubborn promise that it would turn green." Caleb chuckled. "And it did. I don't lie." She turned to him, touching his chest where a faint scar still crossed his shoulder. "You also said you'd survive, to start over. You kept that one too." He smiled softly and squeezed her hand, his silence saying everything words could not. Inside on the wooden table an unopened letter waited. Their daughter ran in, waving it above her head. "Mama, a letter from California!" Amira wiped her hands and opened it. The handwriting was old, shaky, but familiar. Her father's. "Amira, I have left the drink behind and found work at the docks. You should know the money that once belonged to your mother. I've sent it back. It was always yours. I don't ask for forgiveness. I only hope you live a free life, the kind I was too weak to keep for myself." Amira read in silence, eyes glistening. She looked out the window where the children laughed in sunlight and exhaled, slow and light, as if releasing a weight she had carried too long. "He finally learned," she whispered. "And he'll find his peace," Caleb answered, his voice steady and warm. That evening, the wind drifted down from the hills, carrying the scent of wild grass and wood smoke. In the yard behind the house, Amira and Caleb knelt beside an old wooden chest they had kept for years. Beneath a few keepsakes lay a bundle of yellowed scraps, all that remained of the marriage paper torn apart long ago. Amira lifted them carefully, placing them on a small metal dish. They sat side by side. "Do you remember that day?" she asked quietly. Caleb's smile was faint, wistful. "I do. The day I realized some things are worth risking your whole life for." She nodded and struck a match. The flame caught, flickering bright before devouring the brittle edges. The ashes spiraled upward, dancing into the breeze. Together, they watched the past turn to smoke, Amira's voice was soft, almost a prayer. He tore the paper that bound her fate, and she built a life from its ashes. Caleb took her hand again, his eyes glowing with the red of sunset. No one can write your fate for you, Amira. You did that yourself. She looked to the sky where the sunset blazed crimson, the same color as the day she'd lost everything, and the same hue as the day she found herself again. But this time the red wasn't omen or grief. It was light. The light of freedom, of love chosen freely, of a life rebuilt by their own hands. Their children ran toward them, laughter carried on the wind. Amira bent down to catch them, and Caleb wrapped his arms around all three. Together they looked toward the horizon, where the sun dipped behind the hills, its glow brushing across the wooden sign at the gate. Freedom's claim. The evening breeze rippled through the fields, turning the tall grass into a golden sea. Amira leaned her head against Caleb's shoulder and murmured, "If there's another life, I'd choose this one again." Caleb smiled, kissed her hair, his voice quiet but certain. "And I'd tear that paper again, once more, and 1,000 times after." In the last light of day they stood side by side, no longer bound by fear or the past. Only peace, only freedom, and a love that had become the land itself, the wind, the soil, the eternal light over the place they called Freedom's Claim.